Through. A nursing assistant came in to check my vitals, saw my face, and asked if I was in pain. I am Rachel Bennett, and on a Wednesday afternoon in September, I was 20 slides into the most important presentation of my career, when my chest began to tighten like someone was slowly turning a vice. The conference room at Cascade Design Group held 14 people, architects, city council members, and the nonprofit director whose affordable housing project I'd spent 6 months designing. My hands trembled as I clicked to the next rendering, a 3-story complex that would house 40 families currently living in shelters. This was everything I worked toward since graduating, proof that architecture could change lives, not just fill skylines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The numbers on the screen began to swim. Projected costs, unit layouts, sustainability ratings, all blurring into meaningless shapes. I reached for my water bottle, but my arm felt disconnected, moving through thick air. Someone asked about the timeline for Phase 2. I opened my mouth to answer, and the words disintegrated before reaching my tongue. The overhead lights blazed brighter, burning white at the edges of my vision. My supervisor Vanessa stood near the door, her expression shifting from supportive to concerned. I tried to smile to signal I was fine, but my face wouldn't cooperate. The tightness in my chest spread outward, radiating down my left arm in waves of numbness. This wasn't nervousness. This was something breaking inside me. The remote slipped from my fingers, clattering against the table with a sound that seemed to come from miles away. I gripped the edge of the conference table, knuckles white, trying to anchor myself to something solid. The city council member closest to me half rose from her chair, saying something I couldn't hear over the rushing in my ears. Then my knees buckled, and the carpeted floor rose up to meet me as the room tilted sideways and went dark. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Fluorescent lights streaking past overhead. The chemical smell of antiseptic. A blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm in rhythmic intervals. Voices speaking in calm, urgent tones using words like cardiac event and stress-induced, and extremely elevated cortisol. I was moving, being wheeled somewhere, straps across my chest and legs. A paramedic leaned into view, young with kind eyes, asking me questions I couldn't quite grasp. My name. The date. Did I know where I was? The answers felt important but impossibly far away. The emergency room at Legacy Emanuel became my entire universe for the next several hours. Machines beeped in syncopated rhythm, and 4-line fed clear fluid into my arm. Nurses moved through with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, asking about my medical history, my stress levels, whether anyone in my family had heart conditions. Dr. Peterson, the attending physician, had silver hair and steady hands. He explained that I'd experienced a severe stress-induced cardiac episode, that my heart rhythm had been dangerously irregular, that I was lucky my colleagues had called 911 immediately. He asked if there was someone I wanted them to call. I gave them my parents' numbers, both of them. My father David, who traveled constantly for his pharmaceutical sales job, but always picked up when I called. My mother Patricia, whose real estate business kept her perpetually busy, but who insisted family came first. Dr. Peterson assured me they'd been contacted, that they'd been told their daughter was in the hospital with a cardiac emergency, that they should come as soon as possible. I waited. The afternoon dissolved into evening. Nurses changed shifts. My phone sat on the bedside table, screen dark. I told myself Sacramento was only 4 or 5 hours away, that traffic could be unpredictable, that my father might have been in a meeting when they called, that my mother might have been showing a property. Reasonable explanations assembled themselves in neat rows, an architecture of denial I'd been building my entire life. They would come. They had to come. This was serious. This wasn't like missing a college graduation or forgetting a birthday. This was their daughter in a hospital bed with heart monitors and 4 lines. By 8 o'clock, the explanations started wearing thin. By 9, they'd become transparent. By 10, when the night shift nurse asked gently if anyone was coming, I had no answer. I picked up my phone with shaking hands. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. I opened the message thread with my mother, the last exchange from 3 days ago when I'd asked about Thanksgiving plans. She'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji and, "We'll see, lots going on with Mike's brewery." Before I could process that, before I could decide whether to call them myself, A notification banner dropped down from the top of my screen. Instagram. My brother Michael had tagged me in a post. My stomach dropped even before I tapped it. The image loaded in sharp, cruel detail. Michael standing in front of a brick building, arms spread wide, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Behind him, a sign being installed. Bennett Brothers Brewing opening spring 2024. The logo featured two beer glasses clinking together, flanked by the initials MB and DB. Michael Bennett and David Bennett. My father and my brother. Not three Bennetts. Just two. But that wasn't the knife. The knife was the caption. Big day. After months of planning and family support, we're finally making the dream real. Shout out to Mom for handling all the logistics and keeping everything running smooth. Some people doubt, but real family invests in each other. Here's to the ones who show up. Hashtag Bennett Brothers, hashtag family business, hashtag dream big. I read it 3 times. Each word landed like a physical blow. Family support. Real family invests. The ones who show up. I was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm and monitors tracking my heartbeat, and my family was at a brewery opening. Not just attending. Celebrating. My mother handling logistics. My father's name on the sign. Michael's dream becoming reality with their full support, while I'd been struggling to make rent, working freelance gigs on weekends, rationing groceries to make my paycheck stretch. The comments section was filling up. Friends congratulating them. Neighbors saying how proud they must be. Someone asking, "Where's Rachel?" And my mother responding, "She's busy with her career up in Portland. Super proud of her too." With a red heart emoji. The casualness of it, the performance of care while I lay here alone, broke something fundamental inside me. I set the phone face down on the thin hospital blanket. The heart monitor continued its steady beep, proving I was alive, that my heart was still beating despite feeling like it had cracked clean. Nodded because I was just not the kind she could chart or medicate. She adjusted my IV and told me to try to rest. That stress was the worst thing for my condition right now. Rest. As if I could sleep knowing that while I'd collapsed giving a presentation that might house 40 families, my family was toasting my brother's 3rd attempt at entrepreneurship. As if I could close my eyes without seeing that sign. Bennett Brothers. 2 names. 2 people who mattered. I thought about all the times my father had called me his little architect, had seemed genuinely interested in my work. I thought about the monthly deposits that appeared in my account, the ones I'd assumed were from him. His way of helping me build my career while paying down the crushing student loan debt. $3,500 every month like clockwork. For the past 2 years since I'd moved to Portland, I'd been so grateful, so careful with it, using it to make extra loan payments, to buy professional clothes for client meetings, to take the occasional weekend trip to stay sane. It had felt like proof that at least one parent saw me, valued my dreams even if they weren't as flashy as Michael's latest venture. But looking at that photo, at my father's name beside Michael's, at my mother's comment about logistics, something cold settled in my chest. I pulled up my banking app with trembling fingers, navigated to the account where the deposits appeared. It was an account. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My mother had helped me set up in college, back when I'd needed her as a co-signer. I'd never thought about it since, just watched the balance and made my transfers. I clicked through to the account details, to the full transaction history. There, every month, like she'd said. David Bennett, $3,500, with a memo line that read, "For Rachel education and living." Every single month for 24 months. $56,000 my father had sent. $56,000 that should have helped me breathe easier. Should have gone toward my loans, my life, my dreams. But when I looked at the outgoing transactions, my blood turned to ice water. Starting 8 months ago, there were transfers, large ones, to an account labeled M. Bennett Business. $3,000 in February, $3,500 in March, $3,000 in April. The amounts varied slightly, but they were consistent. Month after month. My money, the allowance my father sent for me, redirected without my knowledge, without my permission, to fund my brother's brewery dream. I did the math 3 times, hoping I was wrong. $26,000. Over half of what my father had sent me in the past year had been diverted to Michael, and I'd had no idea. I'd been working freelance gigs on weekends, taking on extra drafting projects, eating rice and beans to stretch my grocery budget, all while $26,000 that should have been mine went to pay for my brother's dream. The dream my family was celebrating tonight while I lay in a hospital bed alone. The room didn't spin this time. It crystallized. Every surface became sharp-edged and brutally clear. The institutional beige walls. The privacy curtain with its sterile blue pattern. The monitors displaying my vitals in green and red numbers. This was my reality. Not the family I'd hoped for. Not the support I'd believed existed, but this. A hospital room, an empty doorway, and a phone full of evidence that I'd never mattered the way Michael did. A text came through. My father, finally. Rachel, honey, just saw the hospital called. Is everything okay? We're at Michael's brewery event. It's been planned for months. Can you call us when you get a chance? I stared at those words until they stopped making sense as language and became just shapes on a screen. Can you call us when you get a chance? Not we're coming. Not we're so worried. Not we'll be there as soon as we can. Just a request that I reach out to them, that I do the emotional labor, that I reassure them everything was fine so they could continue celebrating without guilt. I should probably start with what you need to know about the Bennett family, about how we looked from the outside and what actually existed behind closed doors. My parents, David and Patricia Bennett, were the kind of couple that neighbors pointed to as relationship goals. Dad worked in pharmaceutical sales, traveling up and down the West Coast, always impeccably dressed, always with a story about closing a major deal. Mom sold real estate in the Sacramento suburbs, her face on bus benches and shopping cart ads, her tagline Patricia Bennett, turning houses into homes. They drove matching luxury SUVs, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and sent Christmas cards with professional photos every year. Michael, my older brother by 3 years, had always been the golden child in ways so obvious that family friends would joke about it at gatherings. He was charismatic, quick with a joke, able to charm his way out of any situation. In high school, he'd been captain of the soccer team despite being mediocre at the sport, elected class president despite never following through on campaign promises, voted most likely to succeed despite barely maintaining a C average. None of that mattered. He had something I didn't, some indefinable quality that made people want to root for him, invest in him, believe in his potential even when evidence suggested otherwise. I was different, quieter, more methodical. I'd spent my childhood with graph paper and pencils, designing elaborate floor plans for imaginary houses, measuring and remeasuring to get the proportions perfect. While Michael bounced from interest to interest, soccer to guitar to photography to entrepreneurship, I steadily pursued architecture. I won the regional science fair 3 years running with projects about structural engineering and sustainable design. I graduated valedictorian from high school. I earned a full academic scholarship to UC Berkeley's architecture program. None of it mattered the way Michael's potential mattered. I learned that lesson early and kept relearning it in increasingly painful ways. The summer I turned 11, I spent 6 weeks building a scale model of our house, complete with interior walls, furniture, and working LED lights. I'd saved my allowance to buy materials, watched hours of tutorials online, and stayed up past midnight perfecting tiny crown molding. I carried it downstairs on a Saturday morning when both parents were home, this fragile masterpiece I'd created, and set it carefully on the kitchen table. Mom glanced up from her phone, said, "That's nice, sweetie," and went back to scrolling through real estate listings. Dad was on a work call in the backyard, pacing and gesturing through the sliding glass door. Michael wandered in, looked at it for approximately 5 seconds and said, "Cool Barbie house, Rach," before grabbing a Pop-Tart and heading back upstairs. I stood there for 20 minutes waiting for someone to really look at it, to see the detail work, the effort, the skill. Eventually, I carried it back up to my room, where it sat on my shelf collecting dust until I left for college. 2 months later, Michael announced he wanted to be a photographer. Within a week, Dad had bought him a $3,000 camera with professional lenses. Within a month, they'd converted the garage into a darkroom. Mom told everyone at her book club about Michael's artistic eye, his creative spirit, his gift for capturing moments. He took blurry photos of his friends skateboarding for about 4 months before moving on to his next obsession. The camera sat in a closet. The darkroom became storage. Nobody mentioned the investment or asked what happened to his passion. That pattern repeated through my entire adolescence with minor variations. Michael's interests became family projects, complete with financial backing, emotional investment, and public celebration. My achievements became expected outcomes, mentioned briefly before conversation moved to more interesting topics, mainly whatever Michael was attempting that week. When I made the honor roll, Mom said, "Of course you did. You're so naturally smart." When Michael scraped by with a C+ average, they hired a tutor, attended parent-teacher conferences, and praised his improvement when he brought home a single B. The birthday incident became family legend, though not in the way it should have. I turned 16 on October 23rd, a Saturday that should have been special. Sweet 16, the age that supposedly mattered, that marked some transition into young adulthood. I'd hinted for weeks about wanting a small party, maybe dinner at the Italian restaurant downtown with a few friends. Mom kept saying we'll see, and let me check the calendar, which I took as tentative yes. 3 days before my birthday, Michael called from college. His fraternity was having a parents' weekend, complete with a formal dinner, house tours, and some kind of award ceremony. He really wanted them there. It would mean a lot. All the other guys' parents were coming, Thursday through Sunday, the same weekend as my birthday. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those loaded looks that parents think kids don't notice, the kind where entire conversations happen in eyebrow movements and subtle head tilts. Friday afternoon, I came home from school to find a grocery store sheet cake on the kitchen counter, chocolate with "Happy Birthday, Rachel," written in blue icing that was already starting to run. Next to it, a card and a sticky note. The card had $20 inside and generic printed text about celebrating another year. The note, in Mom's handwriting: "So sorry, sweetheart, Michael's fraternity thing came up. We'll do dinner next weekend. There's lasagna in the fridge. Love you." I sat at the kitchen table alone that Saturday evening, eating lasagna that was slightly freezer burned, looking at that lopsided cake. I'd been so sure this birthday would be different, that 16 would matter enough to compete with Michael's college activities. I cut myself a slice of cake. It was too sweet, the frosting artificial tasting. I ate it anyway, watching the sun set through the kitchen window, waiting for the phone to ring. They called at 9:30, right before the fraternity dinner, a rushed minute of "Happy birthday, honey. And we'll make it up to you." And Michael says hi. We never did do that dinner. The next weekend, Mom had an important listing. The weekend after that, Michael came home unexpectedly, and they took him to Tahoe. By the time my birthday came up again in conversation, it was December, and Mom said, "Oh my goodness, we never did celebrate properly. But with the holidays coming up, let's just make Christmas extra special for you." Christmas morning, I got practical gifts, clothes, and school supplies, while Michael unwrapped a ski package and lift tickets. When I pointed out they'd forgotten about my birthday dinner, Mom looked genuinely confused, as if the promise had never been made. That was the year I stopped expecting things to be different. Something hardened in me that fall, a protective shell that made it easier to watch Michael receive while I went without. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that I was self-sufficient, that needing less from them made me stronger. I threw myself into schoolwork, into my college applications, into building a future that didn't require their validation. I told myself I was choosing independence when really I was just learning to cope with being an afterthought. College was supposed to be my escape. I chose UC Berkeley specifically because it was far enough from Sacramento to feel like freedom, but close enough that they couldn't claim I'd abandoned the family. I worked 3 part-time jobs to cover expenses my scholarship didn't, spending weeknights at the library, weekends at the campus bookstore, and a coffee shop near Telegraph Avenue. I designed dorm rooms for friends, helped architecture students with their models, and slowly built a portfolio that would matter when I applied for internships. Michael, meanwhile, attended a private college in Southern California where tuition ran $40,000 a year. He pledged the most expensive fraternity, took 6 years to graduate with a business degree, and came home most weekends with laundry and an empty bank account. Dad paid for everything without question. When I asked once if there was any financial help available for my expenses, Dad got uncomfortable and said something about the scholarship covering it, about building character through work, about not wanting to make things too easy for me. 2 weeks later, I saw the invoice on his desk for Michael's fraternity dues. $3,000 for a semester. I worked an entire summer to make that much. After graduation, the pattern continued with different specifics. Michael bounced between failed business ventures, each one funded by mom and dad, each one collapsing within 18 months. First was a food truck called Mike's Bites, serving fusion tacos that nobody wanted. $12,000 for the used truck. Another $8,000 for equipment and permits. It lasted 7 months before he sold the truck at a loss and moved on. Next was a fitness app that was supposed to revolutionize home workouts. Dad invested $20,000. The app launched, got 47 downloads, and disappeared from the App Store within 3 months. Then came an e-commerce store selling imported home goods. Another $15,000. Another quiet failure nobody mentioned at family dinners. Each time, mom and dad absorbed the losses without complaint, talking about learning experiences and entrepreneurial spirit, and how success requires taking risks. Each time, Michael moved back home for a few months to regroup, eating their groceries and leaving his laundry for mom to wash, before announcing his next big idea. And each time, they listened with genuine interest, discussed his business plans over dinner, and eventually wrote another check. I graduated from Berkeley with honors and job offers from 3 firms. I chose Cascade Design Group in Portland specifically because they focused on affordable housing and urban sustainability, the kind of work that felt meaningful beyond aesthetics and profit margins. The salary was modest for an architect, $58,000 to start, but it came with benefits and mentorship and real projects. I found a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, assembled IKEA furniture alone, and started building my life. Mom and dad attended my graduation but left immediately after the ceremony to get back for some commitment of Michael's I can't even remember now. We took photos in front of the Berkeley Arch, smiled and posed, and then they were gone. I went to a celebratory dinner with classmates, where everyone else had parents and siblings and grandparents filling tables, making toasts, crying proud tears. I sat at the end of a long table, checking my phone periodically, telling myself it was fine, I was used to it. Their presence at the ceremony was enough. Moving to Portland should have been liberating. For the first few months it was. I loved the city's gray skies and coffee culture. The bridges spanning the Willamette. The Saturday farmers market where I'd buy fresh flowers just because I could. I walked to work along tree-lined streets, spent lunch hours sketching in waterfront parks, stayed late at the office because I wanted to, not because I had to. My apartment was small but mine, decorated with plants from the nursery and artwork from local street fairs. But loneliness has a way of creeping in through the cracks. I'd call home on Sunday evenings trying to maintain connection, trying to prove I hadn't abandoned them even though they'd been abandoning me for years. The conversations followed an identical script every single week. Mom would answer, distracted, asking surface questions while clearly multitasking. How's work? How's the weather? Are you eating enough? Before I could answer properly, she'd pivot to Michael updates. His new business plan, his networking meetings, his latest girlfriend, his struggles with this or that aspect of entrepreneurship. When I try to share my own news, my voice project that got approved or the compliment from a senior partner or the article about affordable housing that quoted my work, there would be a brief pause. That's wonderful, honey, Mom would say in a tone that suggested she was already thinking about the next thing. Then without transition, Michael could really use your advice on his business plan. You're so organized. Maybe you could look at his financial projections? My achievements were opportunities to be useful to Michael. My skills existed to support his dreams. Every single call ended the same way, with me feeling hollowed out and vaguely angry at myself for expecting anything different. I'd hang up and sit on my couch, looking out at the Portland skyline, wondering why I kept reaching out to people who only reached back when they needed something. The monthly deposits started appearing in my account about 6 months after I moved to Portland. I'd been struggling more than I wanted to admit, the reality of architect salaries versus student loan payments creating a constant low-level panic I tried to ignore. My loan balance sat at $87,000, a number so large it felt abstract, meaningless, like someone else's problem I'd somehow inherited. The minimum payments took a quarter of my monthly income. After rent, utilities, groceries, and the professional wardrobe my job required, I was left with almost nothing. I picked up freelance work on weekends, drafting CAD drawings for contractors who needed permit documents but couldn't afford full architectural services. $500 here, $300 there, spent before I earned it on things like car insurance and the credit card I'd been using for emergencies that kept happening. A root canal. New tires. A laptop upgrade because my old one died during a rendering. The balance on that card crept upward despite my best intentions. $6,200 of debt that charged 18% interest and made me feel like I was drowning in slow motion. Then one morning in March, I checked my banking app and saw an unexpected deposit. $3,500 from David Bennett with a memo line reading, "For Rachel Education and Living." I stared at it for a full minute, certain there'd been a mistake, that the bank would realize their error and reverse it. But the money stayed. I texted my father, asking if he'd sent it, if everything was okay. He called me back immediately, sounding almost cheerful. "Of course I sent it, sweetheart," he said. "You're working so hard, and I know those loans are crushing you. Your mom and I want to help you get established. You're building a real career up there, making a difference with your affordable housing work. We're proud of you." Those last 4 words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. We're proud of you. Words I've been rationing my whole life, savoring the rare moments they appeared. "This is going to be regular," Dad continued. "Every month. Use it for your loans, your living expenses, whatever you need. You've earned it." I cried after that phone call, sitting on my apartment floor with my back against the couch, overwhelmed by gratitude and relief, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Maybe they did see me. Maybe distance had given them perspective. Maybe my father at least understood what I'd been working toward and wanted to support it. The money felt like more than financial help. It felt like recognition, like proof that I mattered enough to invest in. The deposits continued like clockwork. First of every month, $3,500 appeared. I set up automatic transfers, watching the money move with careful intention. $1,000 to my student loans, extra beyond the minimum payment. $500 to pay down the credit card. The rest divided between rent, groceries, and a small emergency fund. I was building one careful deposit at a time. For the first time since moving to Portland, I could breathe. I could buy vegetables that weren't wilted clearance bin casualties. I could say yes when coworkers invited me to happy hour. I could imagine a future where debt wasn't crushing me. I called my father every few weeks to thank him, to update him on how I was using the money, to prove I wasn't taking it for granted. He always sounded pleased, asking detailed questions about my projects, remembering the names of buildings I'd mentioned months earlier. We talked about architecture, about design philosophy, about his travels to different cities and the buildings that caught his eye. These conversations felt like the relationship I'd always wanted, like he was finally seeing me as something other than the easy child who didn't need attention. My mother barely acknowledged the deposits when I mentioned them. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, already moving to another topic, usually Michael. Her indifference should have been a warning sign, but I was so grateful for my father's support that I didn't question it. I told myself she was just busy, that real estate consumed her time, that Dad was handling this particular aspect of parenting. I didn't think about the account the money went into, the one she'd helped me set up years ago when I needed a cosigner for a student checking account. Life developed a rhythm. Work filled my weekdays with the kind of engaging challenge I'd craved since college. Cascade Design Group specialized in projects that mattered: housing developments for low-income families, community centers in underserved neighborhoods, public spaces designed for accessibility and inclusion. I worked under Vanessa Kim, a senior architect who actually cared about mentorship, who spent hours reviewing my drawings and pushing me to think bigger, design bolder, consider perspectives I'd missed. Vanessa was everything a mentor should be: brilliant, demanding, and genuinely invested in her junior architect's growth. She had black hair always pulled into a practical bun, glasses that constantly slid down her nose, and a way of asking questions that made you realize you hadn't thought something through. When I worked late, she worked later, never making me feel guilty for leaving but always there if I wanted to talk through a design problem. She invited me to site visits, introduced me to clients, and put my name on proposals when I'd contributed significantly. The affordable housing project became my obsession starting that spring. The city had allocated funding for a development that would house 40 families currently cycling through shelters and temporary housing. Cascade Design Group won the bid, and Vanessa assigned me as the lead designer under her supervision. It was the opportunity I'd been working toward, the chance to prove I could handle significant responsibility, to create something that would materially improve people's lives. I spent months on that project thinking about every detail: how to maximize space in small units without making them feel cramped, how to create private outdoor spaces where kids could play safely, how to incorporate community gathering areas that would foster connection without forcing interaction, how to use affordable materials in ways that felt dignified, not cheap, how to design for durability because these families deserved buildings that would last, that wouldn't fall apart from deferred maintenance and budget cuts. Vanessa let me run with it, offering guidance when I got stuck but mostly trusting my vision. We iterated through dozens of designs, each one getting closer to something that felt right. By late summer, we had renderings that made my chest tight with pride. 3-story buildings with clean lines and warm materials, arranged around a central green space. Ground floor units with small patios. Upper units with balconies just big enough for a chair and some plants. Bike storage, community gardens, a playground designed by the families who'd be living there. The presentation to the City Council and nonprofit partners was scheduled for the second Wednesday in September. Everything I'd worked toward for 6 months would be judged in 90 minutes. Vanessa coached me through the presentation structure, helping me anticipate questions, reminding me to slow down when I got excited about technical details. The night before, I stayed at the office until midnight, rehearsing, adjusting slides, checking and rechecking the numbers because I knew someone would ask about cost per square foot and construction timeline and how we'd phase the project. My friend Marcus, who lived 2 doors down from me in my apartment building, brought me Thai food around 10 that night. He was a graphic designer freelance with a flexible schedule that meant he was often around when I needed someone. He was also one of the only people in Portland who knew my family history, not because I'd planned to tell him but because he'd found me crying on our building's roof deck one Sunday after a particularly brutal call home. Marcus had an easy warmth that made confession feel natural. He was black, originally from Oakland, with close-cropped hair and an ever-present smile that somehow never felt fake. He'd moved to Portland for similar reasons as me, wanting distance from family dynamics that had become suffocating, wanting to build something that was his. We'd bonded over being the overlooked children, the ones who'd gotten out, who were trying to prove something to people who'd never asked for proof. "You're going to kill this presentation," Marcus said that night, unpacking pad thai and spring rolls on my desk. "I've seen your renderings. This project is going to change lives." His confidence steadied me. We ate and talked about everything except architecture, his strategy for keeping me calm. He told me about a logo design he'd just finished for a nonprofit, about the new coffee shop that opened on Division Street, about absolutely nothing until my breathing slowed and my hands stopped shaking. The morning of the presentation, I woke up with that headache, the one that felt like pressure building behind my eyes. I took ibuprofen, drank coffee, told myself it was just nerves. I dressed carefully in my charcoal suit, the one I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack and had tailored to fit properly because presenting to city officials required looking like I knew what I was doing. The silk blouse underneath cost more than I'd wanted to spend but moved beautifully and photographed well. Important for the professional headshots we'd need if the project got approved. Vanessa met me in the conference room an hour early. We set up the laptop, tested the projector, arranged handouts at each seat, checked the temperature and lighting. She straightened my collar, told me I looked like an architect who builds things that matter, and squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this, Rachel. Trust your work. Trust yourself." The room filled gradually. City council members in business casual, shuffling papers and checking phones. The nonprofit director, a woman named Helen who'd spent 20 years in homeless services and had eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her board members, diverse in age and background, all sharing Helen's intensity. Our firm's partners sitting in back observing. This was my show. I started strong, introducing the project scope, the site analysis, the community engagement we'd done with future residents. My voice was steady, my slides advancing smoothly, my laser pointer highlighting key features without shaking. I explained our design philosophy, how we'd balance density requirements with livability, how we'd incorporated trauma-informed design principles because many of these families would be recovering from the instability of homelessness. 15 minutes in, I hit my stride. The audience was engaged, leaning forward, asking good questions that I'd anticipated and prepared for. A council member wanted to know about parking. Another asked about playground safety. Helen asked about accessibility for residents with disabilities, and I walked through our universal design features with genuine enthusiasm. This was everything I'd worked for, proof that architecture could be more than expensive buildings for wealthy clients. Then my chest started to tighten. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable beneath the adrenaline. Just a slight pressure, like I'd been holding my breath too long. I adjusted my posture, trying to create more space for my lungs. Click to the next slide, a cutaway showing unit layouts. Started explaining bedroom configurations and how we designed for flexibility as family needs changed. The pressure increased, wrapping around my ribcage like someone was slowly tightening a strap. I reached for my water bottle, trying to be casual about it, trying not to draw attention to the fact that my hand was trembling. The water helped for a moment, cooling, grounding. I set the bottle down and continued, discussing construction phasing and timeline. 23 months from groundbreaking to occupancy. 18 months if we could accelerate permitting. The numbers came out right, but my voice sounded strange to my own ears, slightly distant, like I was listening to a recording. The tightness spread down my left arm. Not pain exactly, more like numbness, like my arm was falling asleep from the inside out. I tried to shake it off subtly, adjusting my grip on the presentation remote. Someone asked about sustainability features. I opened my mouth to answer, had the information right there. LEED certification and solar panels and rainwater collection. But the words tangled on my tongue. The overhead lights were too bright suddenly, blazing with an intensity that made the room feel overexposed, washed out. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but everything stayed too sharp and too blurry simultaneously. Vanessa stood near the door, her expression shifting from encouraging to concerned. I tried to smile at her to signal I was okay, that I just needed a second, but my face felt frozen, unresponsive to my brain's commands. The remote slipped from my fingers. I watched it fall as if in slow motion, clattering against the conference table with a noise that seemed disproportionately loud. Several people looked up, attention diverted from the screen to me. I bent to pick up the remote, and the movement made the room tilt at a sickening angle. My left arm was almost completely numb now, heavy and useless at my side. I gripped the edge of the conference table with my right hand, knuckles going white with the force of holding on. The city council member closest to me, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair, half rose from her chair. Her mouth was moving, saying something I couldn't hear over the rushing sound that had filled my ears. It sounded like standing next to the ocean during a storm, waves crashing so loud they drown out everything else. I tried to tell her I was fine, that I just needed a moment, but my tongue wouldn't cooperate. Vanessa was moving toward me, crossing the room quickly but still not fast enough. I saw her face, saw genuine fear there, and that scared me more than anything else. Vanessa didn't get scared. Vanessa was steady, unflappable, the person everyone turned to in a crisis. But she looked frightened now, saying my name, reaching for me as my knees decided they were done holding me upright. The carpeted floor came up fast. I remember thinking stupidly that at least it was carpet, not tile, that maybe this would hurt less than it could have. Then I was down, the ceiling tiles spinning above me, people standing and moving and voices overlapping in urgent tones I couldn't separate into meaning. Someone's hand on my wrist checking my pulse, someone else on their phone calling 911. Vanessa's face appearing above me, telling me to stay still, telling me help was coming, telling me everything was going to be okay in a voice that didn't quite believe it. I tried to tell her about the project, about the presentation, about how we needed to finish because 40 families were counting on this. But the words wouldn't come, and the ceiling tiles kept spinning, and then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of sirens getting closer. The ambulance ride existed in fragments, pieces of memory separated by gaps of nothing. The paramedic's face, young and earnest, asking me questions I couldn't quite grasp. My name. The date. Did I know where I was? The answers felt crucial but impossibly distant, like trying to remember a dream that was already fading. I was moving, being wheeled somewhere, straps across my chest and legs holding me to the gurney. An oxygen mask covered my nose and mouth, plastic and uncomfortable but helping somehow, making breathing slightly less difficult. They asked about medications, allergies, medical history, whether anyone in my family had heart problems. I tried to think through the questions but my brain felt sluggish, processing too slowly. My father's side I finally managed. His mother had died of a heart attack in her 60s. The paramedic made a note, asked more questions I couldn't follow. The siren wailed, impossibly loud, and lights strobed past the ambulance windows in dizzying patterns. Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center materialized through the fog, a massive building that meant safety and help in people who would know what to do. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, wheeling me through automatic doors into harsh fluorescent lighting and the overwhelming smell of antiseptic. The ER was controlled chaos, nurses and doctors moving between curtained bays, monitors beeping in different rhythms, someone crying in a distant corner. They transferred me from the gurney to a hospital bed, multiple hands working in coordination, cutting away my silk blouse with scissors that felt violating even though I understood the necessity. Electrodes attached to my chest, cold gel and adhesive, and 4-line inserted into the back of my hand, a sharp pinch followed by dull pressure. A blood pressure cuff on my arm, inflating and deflating in rhythmic intervals. Everyone was asking questions while simultaneously answering them, medical shorthand I didn't understand, codes and numbers and abbreviations. Someone called out my vitals: blood pressure dangerously high, heart rate irregular, oxygen saturation too low. Another voice ordered medications I didn't recognize, and a nurse hung bags of clear fluid on the 4-pole. Dr. Peterson appeared maybe 20 minutes after I arrived, though time had become elastic and unreliable. He had silver hair and a calm demeanor that felt intentionally cultivated, the kind of professional composure that was supposed to make patients feel safe. He introduced himself as the attending physician, pulled up a rolling stool, and actually looked at me like a person instead of a collection of concerning symptoms. "Rachel," he said, and I appreciated that he used my first name, that he'd checked my chart for that basic courtesy. "You've had what we call a stress-induced cardiac episode. Your heart rhythm has been irregular, your blood pressure is through the roof, and your stress hormones are elevated to levels we normally only see in extreme situations. Can you tell me what's been going on in your life?" I tried to answer, to explain about the presentation, the project, the pressure to perform. But as I talked, Dr. Peterson's expression suggested he was hearing something deeper, something I wasn't saying directly. He asked about my work hours, my sleep patterns, my diet, my support system. Had I been under unusual stress? Was there anything at home or in my personal life that was causing anxiety? Did I have family nearby? That last question hit differently. Family nearby. I shook my head. Sacramento, I told him. My parents live in Sacramento. He asked if there was someone I wanted them to call, someone who should be notified that I was here. I gave them both numbers, my mother's cell and my father's, emphasizing that this was serious, that they should please make it clear this was a cardiac emergency, not something minor. Dr. Peterson assured me they'd make the calls, that they'd explain the situation, that my family would be informed I was stable but needed to stay for observation and further testing. He ordered a series of tests, cardiac enzymes and an EKG and a chest X-ray, explaining each one in terms I could understand. Then he said something that made everything feel more real. "Rachel, you're 27 years old. You should not be having cardiac episodes. Something is seriously wrong, either physiologically or in terms of stress management, and we need to figure out what. You're going to be here for a while. Is there anyone else we should call? A partner, a close friend?" I thought about Marcus, about Vanessa, about the few people in Portland who would care that I'd collapsed. But I told Dr. Peterson no, that my parents would come, that family would handle it. He nodded, made notes in my chart, and left to order the tests. A nurse stayed behind, adjusting my checking my vitals again, asking if I needed anything for pain or nausea. I told her I was fine, which was obviously a lie, and she gave me a look that suggested she knew it but wouldn't push. The afternoon dissolved into a series of medical procedures. They wheeled me to radiology for the chest X-ray, the machine humming and clicking above me while a technician instructed me to hold my breath. Back to my ER bay for blood draws, the phlebotomist filling vial after vial with dark red blood that would reveal whatever was breaking inside me. The EKG was quick, electrodes placed in a specific pattern across my chest, the machine printing out a strip of paper with jagged lines that meant nothing to me but made the nurse's eyebrows draw together in concern. Between procedures, I watched the clock. 1 hour since they'd called my parents. 2 hours. 3. I told myself Sacramento was 4, maybe 5 hours away depending on traffic. That my father might have been in a meeting, might have needed time to clear his schedule, arrange coverage for his appointments. That my mother might have been showing a property, might have been with clients she couldn't immediately abandon. Reasonable explanations assembled themselves like building blocks, a structure I erected to support the weight of waiting. But underneath the excuses, a familiar feeling was settling in. The same sensation I'd felt at 16 staring at a grocery store cake, at graduation watching my parents leave early, at every milestone where I'd waited for them to show up and they'd chosen something else. I pushed it down, told myself this was different, this was a hospital, this was serious. People didn't ignore hospital calls. People didn't choose other obligations over their daughter's cardiac emergency. A new nurse came on shift around 6, introducing herself as Claire, checking my vitals and adjusting my blankets with practiced care. She asked if my family was coming, if anyone had arrived yet. I told her they'd been called, that they were probably on their way. She nodded, said nothing, but something in her expression suggested she'd seen this before. Family members who said they were coming and never materialized. She told me to rest if I could. That stress was the worst thing for my condition, that I needed to try to stay calm. Rest felt impossible. I lay in the hospital bed, watching the curtain that separated my bay from the hallway, waiting for it to part and reveal my parents rushing in with worried faces. Every set of footsteps made my heart rate spike on the monitor. Every voice in the corridor made me turn my head. But the footsteps kept walking past, and the voices belonged to other people's families, other people's emergencies, other people's love made visible through presence. By 8 o'clock, the excuses had worn thin as tissue paper. I could see through them to the truth underneath, the pattern that had been there my entire life. By 9, when Claire came back to check my vitals and asked gently if I wanted her to try calling my parents again, I had no answer. My phone sat on the bedside table where a nurse had placed it after cutting me out of my clothes. The screen was dark. No missed calls. No messages. Nothing. I picked it up with hands that shook from more than medical trauma. The battery was at 60%. The signal was full. The phone was working perfectly. It was my family that was broken. I opened my messages, scrolling to the thread with my mother. Our last exchange was from 3 days ago. A brief conversation about Thanksgiving plans where I'd asked if they wanted me to come home, and she'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji and, "We'll see. Lots going on with Mike's Brewery." Mike's Brewery. The words sat there on the screen, innocuous, meaningless until they weren't. I navigated away from messages to Instagram, some instinct I couldn't name pulling me toward social media, toward the place where people performed their lives for public consumption. I checked my notifications and there it was, the red dot that meant someone had tagged me, someone wanted me to see something, someone had decided I belonged in a specific moment they were sharing with the world. My brother Michael had tagged me in a post 20 minutes ago. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Some premonition of pain my body recognized before my brain processed the details. I tapped the notification, and the image loaded in sharp, cruel high definition. Michael standing in front of a brick building, arms spread wide in a gesture of triumph and ownership. Behind him, workers on ladders were installing a sign, black metal. Letters on a white background. Bennett Brothers Brewing, opening spring 2024. The logo was professionally designed, probably cost a few $1,000s, 2 beer glasses clinking together in celebration. Flanking the glasses, initials in an elegant script, MB and DB. Michael Bennett and David Bennett. My father and my brother. Not 3 Bennetts. Not a family business that included everyone. Just brothers, just the men, just the ones who apparently mattered enough to have their names on the building. But the image was just the beginning. The caption was where the knife went in, twisted, carved out whatever hope I'd been protecting. Big day. Michael had written, with 3 exclamation points like his enthusiasm couldn't be contained by standard punctuation. After months of planning and family support, we're finally making the dream real. Shout out to Mom for handling all the logistics and keeping everything running smooth. Some people doubt, but real family invests in each other. Here's to the ones who show up. I read that caption 5 times, each word landing like a physical blow. After months of planning and family support, real family invests in each other. Here's to the ones who show up. Each phrase was a coded message, a statement about who belonged and who didn't, who deserved investment and who was peripheral to the family narrative. I was lying in a hospital bed with electrodes attached to my chest and feeding medication into my veins, and my family was celebrating my brother's 3rd business venture at what I could only assume was the exact moment they should have been driving to Portland. The ones who show up. The irony was so brutal it almost made me laugh, except laughing would have required air I didn't have. They were the ones who hadn't shown up. For my 16th birthday, for my college graduation, for the biggest presentation of my career, for a cardiac emergency that could have killed me. But somehow, in Michael's worldview, in the family mythology they'd all agreed upon, they were the ones who showed up and I was something else. The drama apparently. The one whose absence made family gatherings easier, whose exclusion was worth celebrating on social media. I scrolled through the comments, unable to stop myself even though I knew it would only hurt more. Friends and neighbors congratulating them. Dozens of fire emojis and raised glass emojis and comments about how exciting this was, how proud everyone must be. My mother had responded to several comments, playing the role of supportive matriarch with enthusiasm. "So proud of our boys," she'd written under one comment. Our boys. Not our children. Not our family. Just the boys, the men, the ones who mattered enough to claim ownership over. Someone had asked where I was, a family friend who'd known us since I was young. "Where's Rachel in all this?" the comment read. And I felt a surge of gratitude for being remembered, for someone noticing my absence and questioning it. My mother's response appeared 2 comments down. "She's busy with her career up in Portland. Super proud of her too," followed by a red heart emoji. The casualness of it, the performance of care while actively choosing not to be with me, while redirecting money that should have been supporting my career to fund Michael's dream, felt like betrayal at a cellular level. I set the phone face down on the hospital blanket, but I could still see the image burned into my retina. That sign. Bennett Brothers. The logo that erased me from the family business, from the family story, from the family itself. My hands were shaking badly enough that the movement registered on the heart monitor, the peaks and valleys of my pulse spiking in jagged mountains that brought Claire back to my bedside within seconds. She took one look at my face and didn't ask what happened. She just checked my vitals, her expression growing more concerned as she read the numbers. Blood pressure elevated again. Heart rate irregular. Oxygen saturation dropping. She adjusted something on the 4, and I felt medication flow cool into my vein, something to calm me, to bring my body back from the edge it was approaching. She told me I needed to try to rest, that stress was dangerous in my condition, that whatever I'd just seen or heard needed to be set aside for my own safety. But how do you set aside the confirmation of everything you feared your entire life? How do you rest when you've just received photographic evidence that your family is celebrating your irrelevance? Claire sat with me for a few minutes, not speaking, just present, her hand resting lightly on my arm in a gesture of comfort that felt more genuine than anything my mother had offered in years. Eventually my heart rate stabilized enough that she felt comfortable leaving, but she promised to check back frequently, to make sure I wasn't alone with whatever darkness was threatening to swallow me. After she left, I lay in the dimness of their bay, listening to the sounds of the hospital around me. Monitors beeping in different rhythms, conversations between medical staff, the intercom paging doctors to various departments, someone crying in a distant room. All of it felt very far away, like I was underwater and these were surface sounds barely penetrating. I thought about the allowance, about those monthly deposits I'd been so grateful for, and a terrible suspicion began forming in my mind. I picked up my phone again, navigating to my banking app with fingers that still trembled. The app loaded slowly, security screens requiring my fingerprint and password, each second of delay ratcheting up my anxiety. Finally, my account appeared. The one where the deposits from my father had been landing for 2 years. The balance was lower than it should have been, lower than my careful budgeting could explain, but I chalked that up to unexpected expenses, to my own poor money management, to anything other than what I was beginning to suspect. I clicked through to the account details, to the full transaction history, the comprehensive view that showed every deposit and withdrawal going back months. There they were, regular as clockwork, the deposits from David Bennett, $3,500 on the 1st of every month. The memo line always reading for Rachel Education and Living. 24 deposits over 2 years. $84,000 my father had sent. Money meant to help me establish my career, pay down my suffocating student loans, build a life that wasn't defined by constant financial anxiety. But when I scrolled to the withdrawal section, my blood turned to ice. Starting in February 8 months ago, there were transfers I didn't recognize. Large transfers to an account labeled M. Bennett Business. $3,000 in February, $3,500 in March, $3,000 in April. The amounts varied slightly, but they were consistent, appearing every month alongside my own withdrawals for rent and loan, payments and living expenses. Money leaving my account for Michael's business without my knowledge, without my permission, without even the courtesy of informing me it was happening. I did the math 3 times because surely I was reading it wrong. Surely there was an explanation that didn't involve the betrayal my gut was screaming about. But the numbers were unambiguous. $26,000 had been transferred from my account to Michael's business over the past 8 months. $26,000 that should have gone toward my student loans, that should have helped me build the emergency fund I desperately needed, that should have given me breathing room and security, and the ability to take risks in my career without constant fear of financial catastrophe. Instead, it had funded a brewery. The brewery I was looking at in that Instagram photo, the one with the sign that proclaimed Bennett Brothers, the business venture that my family was celebrating while I lay alone in a hospital bed. The money my father had sent for my education and living had been quietly, systematically stolen and redirected to support Michael's dream. And the only person who could have done that, the only person with access to my account, was my mother. The account had been set up when I was in college, back when I'd needed a cosigner for a student checking account. My mother had come with me to the bank, had provided her information, had helped me navigate the paperwork. At the time it had seemed like a kindness, a rare moment of maternal support. I'd never thought to remove her access after I graduated, after I started earning my own money. The account had just continued existing, a financial infrastructure I rarely examined because I trusted that the money my father sent was mine, that no one would touch it without asking. But my mother had access. My mother, who handled logistics according to Michael's Instagram caption, who kept everything running smooth. My mother, who'd been taking money meant for me and giving it to her favorite child, her golden boy, her son whose dreams apparently mattered more than his sister's survival. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away more effectively than the cardiac episode had. I looked at the dates again, trying to understand the timeline. The transfers had started in February. Michael's brewery planning, according to his social media history, had started around the same time, which meant my mother had looked at my father's deposits, money explicitly designated for my education and living expenses, and had decided that Michael's business venture was a better use of those funds. She'd made that choice every single month for 8 months, watching my father send money for me and redirecting it to Michael, never once mentioning it to either of us. Did my father know? The question felt crucial. Had he been complicit in this, agreeing that Michael's brewery was more important than my student loans? Or had my mother done this without his knowledge, intercepting the money he thought was supporting me, and using it to fund the son she'd always preferred? I wanted desperately to believe my father was innocent, that his phone calls asking about my work and my projects had been genuine, that his pride in my career wasn't performative. But I'd been wrong about so many things regarding my family that I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. My phone buzzed in my hand, and for a wild moment I thought maybe it was my father calling to explain, to apologize, to tell me there'd been a terrible mistake and he was on his way to Portland right now. But it was just a text message, and when I saw who it was from, my stomach dropped even further than I'd thought possible. My father. Finally. 8 hours after the hospital had called him. 8 hours after he'd been told his daughter was in the emergency room with a cardiac emergency, he was reaching out. The message appeared on my screen in gray text against the white background, clinical and detached. Rachel, honey, just saw the hospital called. Is everything okay? We're at Michael's brewery event. It's been planned for months. Can you call us when you get a chance? I read it again, then a fourth time, certain I must be misunderstanding something fundamental. Just saw the hospital called. As if the hospital calling was a minor notification he'd missed, like a reminder about a dentist appointment or a notification that a package had been delivered. As if being told your daughter had a cardiac emergency was something you could just see and acknowledge hours later. Is everything okay? A question that would have been reasonable if asked immediately, if followed by "we're on our way," but became almost grotesque when sent 8 hours after the fact from a brewery celebration. We're at Michael's brewery event. It's been planned for months. An explanation, an excuse, a justification for why he hadn't come, why he'd ignored the hospital's call for 8 hours. As if planning timeline mattered more than his daughter's health, As if a brewery opening was less reschedulable than a cardiac emergency. As if months of planning for Michael's dream outweighed years of my existence. Can you call us when you get a chance? The final insult, asking me to do the emotional labor, to reach out to them, to reassure them that everything was fine so they could continue celebrating without the inconvenience of guilt. I stared at those words until they stopped resembling language and became just shapes, abstract patterns that had no meaning because the meaning was too painful to hold. My father, the one I'd thought cared, the one who'd sent money every month with notes about being proud of me, couldn't be bothered to leave a brewery opening when told his daughter was in the hospital. He'd seen the notification and made an active choice to stay, to prioritize Michael's event, to ask me to call him when convenient rather than dropping everything to be there. The phone felt toxic in my hand, radioactive with betrayal. I wanted to throw it across the room, to watch it shatter against the wall, to destroy the device that kept delivering evidence of how little I mattered to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But that would have brought nurses running, would have required explanations I didn't have the strength to articulate, so I just set it carefully on the bedside table and watched it like it might detonate. Claire returned a few minutes later, drawn by the monitor that was once again showing my distress in real-time data. She looked at the screen, then at my face, then at the phone sitting accusingly on the table. She didn't ask what happened. She just adjusted my medication again, added something to my four that made the edges of the world soften slightly, made the pain a half step further away. She told me that the test results would be back soon, that Dr. Peterson would want to discuss them, that I needed to try to stay calm until then. Staying calm felt like an impossible directive, like asking someone to stay calm while their house burned down around them. But the medication helped, dulling the sharp edges of panic into something more like profound exhaustion. I closed my eyes, not sleeping but retreating, pulling back from the situation into some internal space where the betrayal couldn't quite reach. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the weekends spent doing freelance work, all the times I'd eaten rice and beans to stretch my budget, all the professional opportunities I'd turned down because they didn't pay enough to cover my loans. And the entire time there had been money, $26,000 that should have been mine, that my father had sent specifically for me, that my mother had stolen and given to Michael. While I'd been working myself into a cardiac episode, literally destroying my health trying to make ends meet, my family had been using my money to fund a brewery that had my brother's and father's names on it but not mine. The cruelty of it was almost elegant in its completeness. I thought about the presentation I'd been giving when I collapsed, about those 40 families who needed housing, about the affordable design work that had consumed my life for 6 months. I poured everything into that project because it mattered, because architecture could change lives, because being an architect meant something beyond profit margins and trophy buildings. And I destroyed my health doing it, pushed my body past its limits, all while my family had been systematically undermining me financially while pretending to support me. The curtain to my bay parted, and Dr. Peterson stepped through, tablet in hand, expression serious. He pulled up the rolling stool and sat at eye level with me, a gesture I appreciated even through the fog of exhaustion and medication. He explained that the test results were back, that they showed severely elevated stress hormones, inflammation markers that suggested chronic stress over months, and cardiac indicators that meant my heart had been under significant strain for longer than just today. Rachel, he said carefully, your body is telling a story about prolonged extreme stress. This didn't happen overnight. You've been pushing yourself past healthy limits for a long time. And today your body finally said enough. We need to understand what's causing this level of stress so we can address it, or this will happen again, possibly with worse outcomes. He paused, glanced at the empty chairs where family should have been sitting. Has anyone come? Your parents? I shook my head, and even that small movement felt exhausting. Dr. Peterson's expression shifted, something like understanding mixed with concern. He asked permission to be direct, and when I nodded, he said something that cut through the medication and the shock and the exhaustion. In my experience, when someone has a cardiac episode at 27 with no underlying heart disease, and their family doesn't come to the hospital, there's usually a connection between those two things. Stress doesn't just come from work. It comes from relationships, from family dynamics, from feeling unsupported in fundamental ways. His words gave me permission to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. This wasn't just about working too hard or taking on too much responsibility. This was about spending 27 years trying to earn love from people who decided I wasn't worth the investment, about literally working myself into heart failure trying to prove I deserved the support they gave Michael without him having to ask. My body had kept score even when I tried to pretend it didn't matter, and today it had presented the bill. Dr. Peterson told me I'd need to stay overnight for observation, possibly longer depending on how I responded to treatment. He ordered more tests for the morning, including a stress echocardiogram to see how my heart functioned under controlled conditions. He prescribed medication to regulate my heart rhythm and blood pressure, and he strongly recommended I speak with the hospital's social worker about stress management and support systems. Then he asked the question that made my eyes finally fill with tears. Is there someone we can call who will actually come? A friend, a partner, anyone who should be here with you? I thought about Marcus, about how he'd brought me Thai food the night before, about his easy warmth and genuine care. I thought about Vanessa, about how she'd looked genuinely frightened when I'd collapsed, about how she'd been more of a mentor and support in 2 years than my parents had been in 27. I gave Dr. Peterson Marcus's number and asked if someone could call him, explained that I was okay but needed to stay overnight, that I could use a friend. Dr. Peterson promised someone would reach out immediately, and then he left me alone with my thoughts and the steady beep of the heart monitor that was still, against all odds, keeping rhythm. Marcus arrived within an hour, slightly out of breath like he'd run from the parking garage. He appeared around the curtain with a backpack slung over one shoulder, and an expression of barely controlled worry. When he saw me in the hospital bed, connected to machines and looking probably as terrible as I felt, his face crumpled slightly before he caught himself and moved to the chair beside my bed. He set down the backpack and took my hand carefully, avoiding the 4-line, and just sat with me in the kind of comfortable silence that only real friends can manage. Eventually, I told him everything. About the Instagram post, about the brewery, about the money my mother had been stealing, about my father's text message asking me to call when I had a chance. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hand steady around mine, his presence grounding me in a way I desperately needed. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before saying, "Rachel, you know this is financial abuse, right? Like legally, what your mother did is theft. And what your parents are doing right now, choosing a brewery opening over their daughter's cardiac emergency, that's not normal. That's not okay. That's not something you have to accept or make excuses for." Hearing someone name it, call it what it was without softening the edges or making allowances for family bonds, felt like permission to be angry. I'd spent so long making excuses, constructing elaborate justifications for their behavior, telling myself I was too sensitive or expecting too much. But Marcus was right. This was abuse, financial and emotional, systematic and deliberate. And I didn't have to pretend it was anything else. Claire came back with dinner, hospital food on a tray that Marcus immediately assessed and declared insufficient. He disappeared and returned 20 minutes later with soup from a place near the hospital, something with actual vegetables and flavor, something that felt like care. We ate together in the dimming light of the ER bay, Marcus filling the silence with stories from his day, carefully avoiding any topic that might spike my blood pressure. He told me about a particularly difficult client who kept requesting changes to a logo design, about the new barista at his favorite coffee shop who couldn't make a decent latte, about absolutely nothing that mattered and everything that did because it was normal, it was life continuing, it was proof that the world extended beyond my family's dysfunction. As evening deepened into night, Marcus settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair, refusing to leave even when I told him he didn't have to stay. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he said simply, and that uncomplicated kindness from someone who owed me nothing made me cry harder than the betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me most. He handed me tissues, didn't tell me to stop crying or that everything would be okay, just sat with me in the grief and anger, and kept me company in the darkness. Somewhere in Sacramento, my family was probably still celebrating, toasting Bennett Brothers Brewing and the dreams they'd funded with stolen money. Here in Portland, I was crying in a hospital bed with a friend who'd shown up without being asked, who'd brought soup and stayed past visiting hours and proved that family had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with who appeared when your world fell apart. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside us, tracking the rhythm of a heart that had finally broken under the weight of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, and for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to convince myself that the breaking was somehow my fault. I spent that first night drifting in and out of consciousness, the medication creating a fog where sleep and waking blurred together. Every time I surfaced, Marcus was there in the chair beside my bed, sometimes scrolling through his phone with the brightness turned down, sometimes just sitting in the darkness watching the monitors. Around 3 in the morning, I woke more fully to find him sketching in a notebook balanced on his knee, his face illuminated by the small light clipped to the page. He looked up when my breathing changed, asked if I needed anything, water or the nurse or just company. I told him I needed him to go home to get real sleep, but he just smiled and said he was exactly where he needed to be. Morning brought Dr. Peterson back with another physician, a cardiologist named Dr. Reeves who specialized in stress-induced cardiac conditions. She was maybe 50, with gray haircut and a practical bob and an intensity that suggested she took her work personally. She reviewed my test results on a tablet while asking questions about my lifestyle, my work hours, my stress levels over the past year. I answered honestly for the first time, not downplaying or making excuses, just laying out the reality of 70-hour work weeks and financial anxiety and family dynamics that had been eroding my health for longer than I wanted to admit. Dr. Reeves explained that what I'd experienced was called stress cardiomyopathy, sometimes known as broken heart syndrome, where extreme emotional or physical stress temporarily disrupts the heart's normal pumping function. The condition was usually reversible with rest and stress reduction, but it was also a serious warning sign that my body couldn't sustain the pressure I'd been putting on it. She recommended at least 2 weeks off work, possibly more, along with medication to support my heart function and mandatory follow-up appointments to monitor my recovery. She also strongly suggested therapy, particularly focused on trauma and family dynamics, because untreated emotional stress would continue manifesting physically no matter how much medication they prescribed. After the doctors left, a social worker named Jennifer stopped by with resources about stress management, family conflict, and financial abuse. She provided pamphlets and website information with a gentleness that suggested she understood these weren't easy conversations. She explained that what my mother had done with the bank account constituted financial exploitation, that I had legal options if I wanted to pursue them, that removing her access to my accounts was both possible and advisable. She also mentioned support groups for adults dealing with family estrangement and toxic family dynamics, spaces where people who'd been through similar situations could share strategies for healing and setting boundaries. Marcus took all the pamphlets, organized them in his backpack, and promised we'd go through everything together once I was released. His presence made the practical aspects feel manageable rather than overwhelming. When Jennifer mentioned that I'd need somewhere quiet to recover, somewhere without additional stress, Marcus immediately offered his spare room. "It's small," he said, "but it's quiet and you won't be alone unless you want to be. Plus, I make excellent recovery food." The offer made my throat tight with gratitude and grief, the contrast between his unconditional support and my family's calculated absence almost too stark to process. Vanessa arrived mid-morning, bursting through the curtain with an expression of fierce concern that immediately softened when she saw me awake and responsive. She brought my laptop bag from the office, along with a change of clothes she'd grabbed from my apartment using the spare key I'd given her months ago. She pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed, took my hand, and told me in no uncertain terms that I was not to worry about work, that the presentation had been rescheduled, that the project was fine and would still be fine whenever I was ready to return. "That presentation was incredible," Vanessa said. "You'd convinced them before you even collapsed. Helen called me yesterday afternoon to say the nonprofit board had already voted to approve, that your design was exactly what they'd been hoping for. This project is yours, Rachel. It's going to happen and it's going to change lives and you're going to see it through. But first, you need to take care of yourself, because you're no good to those 40 families if you're dead." Her bluntness was exactly what I needed, cutting through the guilt I'd been feeling about collapsing during such an important moment. She stayed for an hour, telling me about office gossip and the new intern who couldn't work the coffee maker, and anything that would make me laugh, or at least smile. Before leaving, she hugged me carefully, avoiding the 4 lines and monitor wires, and whispered, "Whatever's happening with your family, whatever made you sick enough to end up here, you don't have to handle it alone. You have people in Portland who care about you, who value you, who will show up. Remember that." They discharged me late that afternoon with a bag full of prescriptions and instructions for follow-up appointments. Marcus drove me to his apartment in the Pearl District, just 3 blocks from my own place, and settled me into his spare room like I was something fragile that needed careful handling. The room was small as promised, barely big enough for a double bed and a dresser, but it had a window overlooking the street and a bookshelf full of graphic novels and a calm energy that felt immediately safe. Marcus brought me water and the first round of medications, showed me where everything was in the apartment, and told me his only rule was that I had to let him know if I needed anything rather than trying to tough it out alone. For the first 2 days I mostly slept. The exhaustion was profound, not just physical but emotional, like my body had been holding itself together through sheer determination, and was now demanding payment for all those years of pushing too hard. Marcus worked from his dining table, designing logos and brand packages for clients while remaining available whenever I emerged from the spare room. He cooked simple meals that I could eat in bed, brought me tea without being asked, and maintained a running commentary about nothing important that kept me tethered to normalcy. My phone sat on the bedside table, mostly ignored. My parents had each sent one additional message. My mother said, "Rachel, please call us. We're very worried and don't understand why you're not responding." My father's was similar. "Honey, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about this. Call when you can." Both messages shared a common feature. They positioned my silence as the problem, my lack of response as the crisis requiring resolution, rather than acknowledging their absence during an actual emergency or the financial theft that had funded their celebration. Michael sent nothing directly to me, but he'd posted 3 more photos from the brewery event, each one showing my parents beaming with pride, holding up glasses in toast, posing with extended family and friends I recognized from childhood. In every photo they looked genuinely happy, completely at peace with their choice to prioritize this event over my hospitalization. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. These were the same people who'd always claimed family came first, who'd made a show of family dinners and Christmas traditions and the appearance of closeness. But when tested, when forced to choose between performance and presence, they'd chosen performance without hesitation. On the 3rd day, I felt strong enough to actually look at my bank account in detail. Marcus sat beside me on the couch, a supportive presence as I navigated through months of statements, documenting every unauthorized transfer. The theft was systematic and ongoing. February through September, 8 months of redirected funds, $26,000 stolen from an account my mother had access to only because I trusted her years ago when I was young and needed a cosigner. The pattern was clear. She'd waited until my father's deposit cleared, then immediately transferred most of it to Michael's business account, leaving just enough to make the balance seem plausible if I glanced at it quickly. I'd been too busy, too stressed, too focused on surviving to notice the discrepancy. I'd attributed my financial struggles to my own poor management, to unexpected expenses, to the normal difficulties of entry-level professional life. It had never occurred to me that my own mother was systematically stealing from me, funding my brother's dream with money explicitly designated for my education and survival. The violation felt almost worse than the financial loss, this intimate betrayal by someone who should have protected me. Marcus helped me document everything, taking screenshots of each transaction, creating a spreadsheet that tracked the dates and amounts, building a record that would matter if I decided to pursue legal action. He called the bank on my behalf, explained the situation, and helped me remove my mother's access to the account. The process required notarized documents and multiple forms of identification, security measures designed to prevent exactly the kind of theft my mother had been committing. The bank representative was sympathetic but also frustrated that I hadn't noticed sooner, that I'd let someone maintain access to an account for years after it was necessary. The same day we secured my bank account, my father called. I'd been expecting it, dreading it, but when his name appeared on my screen, I felt surprisingly calm. Marcus gestured, asking if I wanted privacy, but I shook my head and answered on speaker. My father's voice came through warm and concerned, the tone he used when he wanted to smooth over conflict and return to comfortable pretense. "Rachel, sweetheart. Thank goodness you answered. Your mother and I have been so worried. We got this strange notification from your bank saying we no longer have access to your account. There must be some mistake. And we still don't understand why you're upset about Michael's brewery. We tried to call you from the event, but you didn't answer, so we assumed you were fine." The lies were so casual, so reflexive, that they barely registered as dishonesty in his voice. They tried to call from the event, except my phone logs showed no missed calls. I'd been fine, except they'd been told I was in the hospital with a cardiac emergency. A mistake with the bank, except removing a thief's access wasn't a mistake. It was long overdue protection. I took a slow breath, feeling Marcus's steady presence beside me, and decided I was done with comfortable pretense. Dad, the hospital called you 8 hours before you texted me. They told you I'd had a cardiac episode, that I was in the emergency room. You chose to stay at Michael's brewery opening instead of coming. That's not a miscommunication. That's a choice you made, and you need to own it instead of pretending you tried to reach me and couldn't. Silence on the other end, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, his voice slightly defensive. Rachel, that's not fair. Michael had been planning this event for months. We couldn't just abandon him on such an important day. We assumed if it was truly serious, the hospital would have said so more clearly. They told you I had a cardiac emergency, I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising. What part of cardiac emergency sounds not serious? And you want to talk about what's not fair? Let's talk about the $26,000 Mom transferred from my account to Michael's business. Money you sent explicitly for my education and living expenses. Money she stole without asking me, without telling you, to fund the brewery you were celebrating while I was in the hospital. Another long silence, and this time I could hear my mother's voice in the background, sharp and urgent, asking what I was saying. My father's response was muffled, hand probably over the phone, but I heard enough to know he was surprised, that he genuinely hadn't known about the transfers. When he came back on the line, his voice had changed, less defensive and more confused. Rachel, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been sending you money every month for 2 years. $3,500 to help with your loans and expenses. Your mother said she'd set up the account for you in college, that it was all arranged. I had no idea she was moving money to Michael. My mother's voice got louder in the background, and suddenly she was on the phone, her real estate agent voice in full effect, smooth and reasonable and completely false. Rachel, honey, there's been a misunderstanding. Michael needed capital for the brewery, and you've been saying how well you were doing in Portland, how your job was going so well. I thought you wouldn't mind helping your brother achieve his dreams. Family supports family. That money was just sitting in your account not doing anything productive. The audacity of it, the complete reframing of theft as family support, as something I should have been grateful to participate in, made my hands shake. That money was paying down my student loans, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I have $87,000 in debt. I've been working freelance jobs on weekends to make ends meet. I've been eating rice and beans to stretch my grocery budget. And the entire time, you were stealing my money to fund Michael's third failed business venture. That's not family support. That's theft. Don't be dramatic, my mother snapped, the smooth facade cracking to reveal the irritation underneath. Michael's brewery is not going to fail. It's a solid business plan, and he's worked incredibly hard on it. Someone has to invest in him, believe in his potential. You've always been so self-sufficient, so good at managing on your own. We knew you'd be fine. Michael needed the help more. There it was, the core belief that had shaped my entire childhood laid bare without pretense. I'd always been fine on my own, which meant I deserved less attention, less investment, less love. Michael needed help, which meant he deserved everything, including money that wasn't theirs to give. The logic was circular and toxic, and I was done pretending it made sense. I wasn't fine, I said quietly. I've been having panic attacks for months. I collapsed during the most important presentation of my career, because my body couldn't handle the stress anymore. The doctor said I have stress cardiomyopathy, which means I literally worried myself into heart failure. And when I ended up in the hospital, you chose a brewery opening over being there. You chose Michael over me, just like you've chosen him over me my entire life. My father's voice returned, and he sounded genuinely shaken for the first time. Rachel, I didn't know it was that serious. I thought, you're young and healthy, cardiac issues don't happen to people your age. I assumed you'd be fine, that it was precautionary. You assumed, I repeated. You assumed I'd be fine without checking, without coming, without caring enough to prioritize me for one single day. And that's the problem, Dad. I've spent 27 years being the child you assume is fine, the one you don't have to worry about, the one you don't have to invest in. And it almost killed me. The line went quiet except for my mother's breathing, sharp and angry. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. So what do you want, Rachel? An apology? Money? You removed me from your bank account, so clearly you've decided to cut us out. Is that what this is about? You're punishing us for supporting your brother? The question revealed everything about how she saw the situation, how she'd framed my hospitalization and her theft and their absence as somehow equivalent to my reaction to those things. I was punishing them by protecting my money. I was being unreasonable by expecting them to show up during an emergency. I was causing drama by naming the patterns that had existed my entire life. I want you to acknowledge what you did, I said. I want you to admit that you stole from me, that you chose Michael over me, that you've been choosing him over me for my entire life. I want you to stop pretending this is normal, that this is how families work, that I'm being unreasonable for expecting basic care and respect. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, my mother said, the classic non-apology that accepted no responsibility. But I did what I thought was best for the family. Michael's brewery is going to be successful, and eventually you'll see that supporting him was the right choice. You've always been too sensitive, too focused on keeping score instead of being happy for your brother's achievements. There it was again, the reframing that made my hurt feelings the problem, my accurate accounting of neglect into scorekeeping, my entirely reasonable expectation of equal treatment into jealousy. I felt Marcus's hand on my shoulder, grounding me, reminding me I didn't have to continue this conversation, that I didn't owe them more explanation or justification. I'm not keeping score, I said. I'm recognizing a pattern and choosing not to participate in it anymore. I'm setting boundaries. And the first boundary is this. I will not have a relationship with people who steal from me, and then act like I'm being unreasonable for objecting. You took $26,000 that wasn't yours. You need to pay it back. My mother laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. We don't have that money anymore, Rachel. It's invested in the brewery. Equipment, renovations, licensing fees. It's not liquid. And frankly, I don't think we owe you anything. That money came from your father's business account, which means it's family money, and I decided Michael needed it more. If you can't understand that, if you can't support your own brother, then maybe you're not the family-oriented person we thought you were. The irony of her accusing me of not being family-oriented while she defended stealing from me to fund my brother was so absurd it made me want to laugh or cry or both. But mostly I just felt tired, bone-deep exhausted by the effort it took to maintain relationships with people who fundamentally didn't value me, who saw my existence as less important than my brother's comfort, who'd watch me work myself into heart failure before they'd redirect even a fraction of their investment away from the golden child. Then I guess I'm not, I said. I'm not going to keep trying to earn love from people who've decided I'm not worth it. I'm not going to keep making excuses for why you don't show up, why you don't invest in me, why you steal from me and call it family support. I'm done. My father tried to interrupt, his voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard before. Rachel, don't say that. Don't throw away your family over money. We can work this out. Maybe your mother made a mistake with the transfers. Maybe we should have come to Portland, but we're still your parents. You can't just walk away from family. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm standing still. You're the ones who've been walking away my entire life. I'm just finally admitting it instead of pretending your absence is somehow my fault. I hung up before they could respond, before my father could try to negotiate or my mother could launch into another justification. My hands were shaking, and my heart rate was elevated enough that the Fitbit Marcus had lent me buzzed with a warning to breathe slowly and calm down. But underneath the anxiety was something that felt like relief. Like I'd finally said the things I'd been swallowing for decades. Like I'd finally stopped performing the role of the easy child who didn't need anything. Marcus pulled me into a careful hug and I cried against his shoulder for a long time, not because I was sad exactly, but because ending something that had been slowly killing me still hurt, still felt like losing even when keeping it would have cost me more. He didn't offer platitudes or tell me everything would be okay or suggest that maybe they'd come around eventually. He just held me while I cried, and then made tea, and put on a mindless cooking show that required no emotional investment, and sat beside me on the couch, proving that support didn't have to be complicated or conditional. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange suspended state. I attended follow-up appointments with Dr. Reeves, who monitored my heart function and adjusted my medications and continued recommending therapy with increasing insistence. I started seeing a counselor who specialized in family trauma, a woman named Dr. Patel who helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just garden-variety parental favoritism, but a systematic pattern of emotional neglect and financial abuse. She used terms like golden child and scapegoat, explained family systems where one child receives all the investment and validation, while another child is relegated to supporting role, expected to be self-sufficient and undemanding. Hearing my childhood explained through therapeutic frameworks felt both validating and devastating. Validating because someone with credentials was confirming that my experiences weren't normal, weren't my fault, weren't something I should have just handled better. Devastating because it made clear how much time I'd wasted trying to earn love from people who decided before I could even understand what was happening that I wasn't worth their full investment. Dr. Patel assigned homework, exercises for building self-worth independent of external validation, strategies for setting and maintaining boundaries with family members who didn't respect them. Vanessa brought work to me in careful doses, design problems I could solve from Marcus's couch, small tasks that kept my brain engaged without overwhelming my still recovering system. The affordable housing project moved forward on schedule, and she made sure I knew my work was valued, that my collapse hadn't damaged my professional reputation, that Cascade Design Group wanted me back when I was ready. She also mentioned carefully that the partners had discussed the timeline I'd been keeping before the collapse, the 70-hour weeks and weekend work, and they'd agreed that better work-life balance needed to be built into project schedules. "We don't want you back if it means killing yourself," she said bluntly. "The work matters, but you matter more." Marcus's spare room became my temporary sanctuary, a space where I could heal without performance or pretense. He worked his graphic design projects during the day while I read or sketched or attended therapy appointments via video call. Evenings we cooked together, simple meals that felt like collaboration rather than obligation. He introduced me to his friend group, designers and artists who gathered for game nights and bad movie marathons and conversations that never felt like I had to prove I deserved to be included. They accepted Marcus's explanation that I was recovering from a health crisis and staying with him temporarily, and they folded me into their social circle with an ease that made me realize how much energy I'd been spending trying to fit into my own family. 3 weeks after my collapse, a letter arrived at my apartment, forwarded by a neighbor to Marcus's address. Official letterhead, legal language, my parents' attorney explaining that they disputed my characterization of the bank transfers as theft, that the money had been used for family purposes with family assets, that I had no legal standing to demand repayment. The letter suggested that pursuing legal action would be expensive and ultimately futile, that family court judges rarely sided with adult children in disputes over parental financial decisions, that I should consider the emotional cost of dragging my family through litigation. The letter was designed to intimidate, to make me feel like I had no recourse, like accepting their theft was my only option. But Jennifer, the hospital social worker, had connected me with a legal aid attorney who specialized in financial exploitation. I forwarded the letter to her, and she responded within hours with her own letter, laying out exactly how what my mother had done constituted theft regardless of the account's cosigner status, how the explicit designation of funds for my education and living expenses created a legal obligation that had been violated, how my parents' attorney's letter was mostly bluff designed to avoid actual legal consequences. My attorney offered to pursue the case if I wanted, warning me that it would be emotionally difficult, that my family would likely escalate their attacks and justifications, that winning might not feel like winning when it meant permanently severing already damaged relationships. I thought about it for days, weighing the financial recovery against the emotional cost, trying to decide if justice was worth the pain of making the betrayal official and public. In the end, I decided not to pursue legal action, but not because I believed their justifications or accepted their framing of the theft as family support. I decided not to pursue it because I realized that no amount of money returned would repair what they'd broken, that forcing them to pay me back wouldn't make them capable of the love and recognition I'd spent my life seeking. The money was gone, invested in a brewery that would probably fail like Michael's other ventures, and pursuing it through court would mean remaining entangled with people who'd proven they couldn't value me appropriately. Instead, I used the documentation I'd created for a different purpose. I wrote a letter detailed and specific, laying out every transfer, every broken promise, Every time they'd chosen Michael over me from childhood through the brewery celebration. I didn't send it looking for an apology or reconciliation. I sent it as a record, as proof that I saw clearly what they'd done, that I wasn't confused or overreacting or being too sensitive. I ended the letter with a clear statement. I was not cutting them off, but I was stepping back indefinitely, removing myself from family obligations and expectations, and I would not be reaching out or responding to their contact unless and until they could acknowledge the full scope of their behavior and demonstrate genuine change. I sent copies to both my parents and to Michael, wanting him to know that his dream had been funded with stolen money, that his celebration had come at my expense in ways more literal than he probably realized. Then I blocked their numbers, unfollowed them on social media, and began the work of building a life that didn't revolve around earning their approval or compensating for their neglect. My parents tried to reach me through other channels. Emails I didn't open, messages passed through extended family members I politely declined to respond to, even a handwritten letter from my father that arrived a month later claiming he missed me and wished we could move past this unfortunate misunderstanding. Each attempt felt like more evidence that they hadn't heard me, hadn't understood, were still operating in the framework where my hurt was an overreaction they could smooth away with enough persistence. Michael sent one text that got through before I blocked him everywhere. I don't know what Mom did with your money, but the brewery is going to succeed, and when it does, I'll pay you back with interest. You're my sister. I don't want us to be enemies over this. The message revealed his complete misunderstanding of the situation, his belief that this was about money rather than decades of being rendered invisible, that financial repayment could resolve wounds that had nothing to do with dollars. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said, and explaining further would have required emotional labor I was no longer willing to provide. By the time I returned to work 6 weeks after my collapse, I'd moved into a new apartment, a one-bedroom in a different building with a balcony overlooking a small park. Marcus helped me move, along with Vanessa and several co-workers who'd become friends. We spent a Saturday carrying boxes and assembling furniture and ordering pizza, and it felt like the kind of family gathering I'd always imagined existed somewhere. People showing up because they wanted to, because they cared, because helping was what friends did without needing to be asked. The affordable housing project broke ground that fall, and I attended the ceremony with Vanessa and the nonprofit team and the families who would eventually live in the buildings I designed. Helen, the nonprofit director, gave a speech about how architecture could be an act of love, how designing with dignity for people experiencing homelessness was revolutionary work. She thanked our firm, thanked me specifically for the vision and care that had gone into every detail. I stood there in the autumn sun, watching construction crews prepare the site, and felt something that might have been pride untainted by the need for parental approval, satisfaction that existed independent of external validation. Marcus threw me a celebration dinner that night, inviting the people who'd become my chosen family over the past year. Vanessa brought wine and stories about the office. Dr. Patel came as a friend rather than a therapist, having transitioned me to maintenance sessions now that I'd done the intensive work of unpacking family trauma. Co-workers and neighbors filled Marcus's apartment with warmth and laughter and genuine celebration of my achievement. No one compared my success to a sibling's. No one qualified their pride with suggestions about how I could have done better. No one left early for someone else's event. They were there for me, completely and without reservation, and that simple fact felt more healing than any amount of therapy or medication. I still thought about my parents sometimes, wondered if they'd realize what they'd lost by choosing investment in Michael over relationship with me, wondered if the brewery would succeed or fail, wondered if they ever looked at photos from my housing project and felt regret. But the wondering was different now, less desperate, more anthropological. I was curious about them the way you might be curious about people you used to know, people whose choices had taken them down a path you no longer traveled. The stress cardiomyopathy resolved completely within 3 months, my heart function returning to normal according to follow-up tests. Dr. Reeves cautioned that I'd always be at risk for recurrence if I didn't maintain better stress management and work-life balance, that my body had shown me its limits and I needed to respect them. I took the warning seriously, cutting my work hours to sustainable levels, building in time for pottery classes and hiking and the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I learned to recognize when I was sliding back into old patterns of overwork and self-sacrifice, and I'd force myself to stop, to rest, to remember that my worth wasn't measured in productivity or achievement. A year after my collapse, Michael's brewery closed. I learned about it through a mutual acquaintance who didn't realize we were estranged, someone who mentioned in passing that it was such a shame about Bennett brothers, that they'd had a good concept but couldn't sustain the costs. I felt no satisfaction in the failure, no vindication that my stolen money had been wasted. Mostly I felt sad for Michael, who'd been raised to believe he deserved unlimited support regardless of track record, who'd been set up to fail by parents who'd always bailed him out rather than letting him learn from natural consequences. I wondered briefly if my parents would reach out, if the brewery's failure would make them reflect on their choices, if they'd apologize for the theft now that the investment hadn't paid off. But no contact came, and eventually I stopped wondering. They'd made their choices. They'd chosen performance over presence, chosen Michael's potential over my reality, chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. And I'd chosen to stop waiting for them to change, to stop letting their inability to value me dictate my sense of worth. The housing project completed on schedule, and I attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony on a bright spring morning. The families moved into their new homes with excitement and relief, kids running through the community spaces I designed, adults marveling at the details that made small spaces feel dignified and intentional. Helen found me during the celebration, pulled me aside and said something I'd carry with me always. You created this. Not your family name, not your parents' money, not anyone else's investment. You, with your talent and your care and your vision. This is yours, and it's going to matter to these families for decades. She was right. The buildings would stand, would shelter families, would provide stability and safety, and a foundation for people to rebuild their lives. My name was on the architectural plans, my design shaping space that would witness children growing up, families healing, lives transforming. That legacy belonged to me, earned through skill and dedication and the kind of hard work that had almost killed me before I'd learned to balance it with self-preservation. Marcus took photos that day, candid shots of me talking with residents, explaining design choices to journalists who'd come to cover the project, standing in front of the buildings with an expression of pure satisfaction. Later, looking at those photos, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different physically, but because the person in those images looked genuinely happy, untroubled by the need for approval from people who'd never learned how to give it. That person had built something meaningful, had survived a health crisis that exposed family dysfunction, had chosen healing over forcing reconciliation, had created a chosen family from people who understood that love was demonstrated through presence, not performance. I printed one of those photos, the one where I'm standing in front of the buildings with the community garden visible in the background, and hung it on my apartment wall. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, not because I was trying to compensate for feeling invisible, but because I wanted to remember that moment, that project, that version of myself who'd finally stopped seeking validation from people who'd never offered it freely. The photo reminded me that family wasn't defined by biology, but by who showed up during crisis, who invested without expectation of return, who loved without keeping score. Some people have families who raise them with unconditional love, who celebrate their achievements without comparison, who show up during emergencies without needing to be convinced. I wasn't one of those people, but I'd built something better than the family I'd been born into. I'd found people who valued me for who I was rather than for how little I demanded, who supported me without stealing from me, who proved that love could be simple and steady rather than conditional and transactional. My parents sent a Christmas card that first year after our estrangement, a photo of them with Michael in front of the closed brewery, all three smiling bravely like they were facing adversity together as a family. The card came with a note saying they hoped I'd come home for the holidays, that family should be together, that enough time had passed to move forward. I looked at that card for a long time, at their practiced smiles and careful staging, at the performance of family unity that had always mattered more to them than actual connection. Then I recycled it and confirmed my plans to spend Christmas with Marcus and Vanessa, and the chosen family who'd proven they knew what showing up actually meant. I don't know if my parents ever understood what they'd lost, if they ever connected their choices to my absence, if they ever looked at the affordable housing project that won architectural awards and realized their daughter had created something meaningful without their support or recognition. I don't know if Michael ever grasped that his dreams had been funded with money stolen from his sister's future, that his parents had damaged one child to support another. I don't know if they ever changed, ever grew, ever learned to value all their children equally. But I know that I changed. I learned that love isn't supposed to hurt, that family isn't supposed to require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, that your worth isn't determined by how much you can endure without complaint. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you properly, that protecting yourself isn't selfish even when people call it that chosen family matters just as much if not more than the family you're born into. The buildings I designed still stand, sheltering families, providing stability, proving that architecture can be an act of care for people society often forgets. My heart recovered, stronger for having broken and healed, more resilient for understanding its limits. And I built a life in Portland surrounded by people who show up, who invest without resentment, who love without conditions, who prove that the family you choose can heal wounds the family you're born into created. That's the family that matters. The one that appears when you collapse, that brings soup to hospital rooms, that helps you set boundaries and respects them, that celebrates your achievements without diminishing them through comparison. The one that proves love isn't about blood or obligation but about consistent presence, genuine care, and the simple revolutionary act of showing up. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.